James.
Welcome to Bonehead. It is our privilege tonight to be talking to Philip Huber, the known for the puppets the Marionettes on Being John Malkovich. Let's see, we've got the China doll.
Four more times.
I don't teach public communication or public speaking.
Would you like us to call you Phil, Philip, Mr. Huber?
I was going to say, no, he teaches in public restrooms.
Thanks,
you don't want to know what he teaches. Is Phil or Philip or Mr. Huber?
Philip.
Philip? Okay. I did not want to get too much on a level. Yeah, Philip's enjoying this, listening to you say is what I wanted to say.
Oh, well, anyway, tons of marionette and puppeteering work. Our guest this evening is Philip Huber.
We have tried to get a puppeteer on this show. Gentlemen, for 2 years, I know Chad and I know James has worked really hard at it.
Yeah.
That's what I was telling him before we started to record, that we've had people say we just don't think people aren't interested in the old stuff anymore. And I'm like, the old stuff is what I love. I love the new stuff
That's
too.
What everyone is interested in. So
yeah, it's the low tech stuff that I do.
Philip, I want you to be the voice for all puppeteers and tell me, why the hell won't you people talk to us?
I have no idea. Maybe puppeteers tend to be really, really shy, just like a lot of major.
Right.
And that could be the reason. But I've done this my whole life. And of course, once I started doing some film work and some major stage work, then everybody wanted to talk to me about those things. So,
right.
So I was doing interviews all the time.
Hold on. I'm going to get some great suck-up points. So you've only been doing this for 20 years? Wow.
Oh, can you see how the show is going to go? You're going to have a good time. I promise you're going to have a good time. We will be wonderful to you. We have a hard time with puppeteers getting them on the show, and we're fascinated by it. We love pop culture in all sense of the word. We have production artists, production designers, directors, writers, authors, music folk, musicians. I couldn't say musicians, but it's. I mean, at what point in your childhood did you think this is what I want to do, and what led to that? And it's a very cliche question, but I was thinking of the questions today, and I had to start there at the beginning.
Yeah, I can tell you exactly when. It was at the age of 15, and I declared myself professional and said, this is what I'm going to do. Because there was nothing else that I enjoyed more than that. I had started performing when I was about 7 years old, using hand puppets, something pretty simple. I was given a hand puppet. My very first one was when I was 3 years old. My mother noticed that I was extremely shy. And so I'm not sure that was the reason, but she gave me a puppet and it did help me express myself. And I would hide behind the sofa in the living room, and it was a little dog, hand puppet, Steiff dog. And it would just pop up from behind the sofa, and if somebody walked through the living room, then the dog would bark at it and start doing a show.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What was the dog's name?
Spotty.
Spotty. That's great. I had a puppet that they make fun of me that has been my hand puppet, that it's just kind of a stuffed puppet. Its name was Spot. James, you still have not returned Spot.
No, Spot's here. Spot hangs out with me.
I know.
Since
There's
we've
a
been
long story that we're not going to get into here. Do you still have Spotty?
Yeah, Spotty is actually behind me. You can't see her, unfortunately. He's under a glass case and on the lower side in front of that window that's behind me. But
So, go ahead, Chad.
No, I just said wow, because I can see it in the background. It's kind of in the Beauty and the Beast type dome where the rose held.
it's down below, unfortunately. That's why you can't see it. It's below.
Oh, okay.
There are two different levels on that little stand. So.
Oh, amazing.
So was there an instance at that 15 when you said, I'm professional? What was it that just said, I'm a professional puppeteer?
It was because I had been working long enough with the Marionettes at that point, which I really enjoyed. I moved from the hand puppets to the Marionettes because they were more technically demanding, and I wanted that. And also, I was trained as a dancer from the age of 6.
Wow.
So, body puppet, which you don't have, of course, with the hand puppets. They're just this much. But so I I started working with the Marionettes then when I was about 11. And I started putting together shows. And my mother helped me build a small permanent theater in our basement. And I would do shows and invite the neighbor kids in to see it, especially at holiday time. So for Easter or Christmas or things like that, I would do these shows. And at 15, I actually started building my own marionettes. Up to that point, I had only used commercially made marionettes. I found really nice ones that were made in England. They were called Pelham puppets, and wood with metal joint, nice things, which nothing like that exists anymore for commercial puppets, which is too bad, because puppets are a great thing for children. It really stimulates their imagination anyway, and it was for me. But the marionettes were just something that I loved at that point, and I thought, this is it. And when I started building my own and producing my own shows with these homemade ones, then I said, okay, I'm professional. I'm charging for this. And actually, I had been charging earlier, but it wasn't anything that you could earn a profit with. It was like 5 cents, 10 cents, 25 cents to come in and see the show. But Lions Club hired me, Boy Scout troops hired me to come perform and things like that in my small town in Northern Illinois. And that was the beginning of my professional career.
So how was high school with this?
Well, high school was difficult for me, of course, as you can imagine. I was bullied pretty badly for that because you're labeled right away that you play with dolls.
Right.
The interesting thing about that is I built some of my first marionettes as art projects in art class because that's where I tried to spend a lot of my time. And I was a little bit too shy still to be in the theater things. I danced in the musicals at the high school and things like that, but I didn't really perform in any of the theater productions. But at one point, they actually asked me to come in and do a marionette show, and what I was doing was variety. So it was great. It worked for any audience. Circus acts and vaudeville type of acts that you would see, singers. Right. I'd have portraits of certain stars and things like that. And I was asked to do a show for the entire high school for an assembly, and I did. And the interesting thing about that, that's when the bullying kind of disappeared and stopped, because I actually gained respect from that. When people saw what I did, they were impressed. And I had a PE teacher that really hated me, and he was pretty sadistic with me whenever possible. And the day after I did that show at school, he walked up to me in PE class that day and he said, you know, you're pretty good. You should be on television. And that was probably the best compliment I could get from this guy who didn't like me at all.
So there's only 3 or 4 things that me and my two best friends and I have in common. And one of them.
Where are they?
Well, they're going to be on after this show.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Is that we all 3 hated high school.
Oh, yes.
There's a great Stephen King quote. It's not so much that I don't like people who enjoyed high school. I just fundamentally don't trust them. So you were telling me that, and it was just, that's all was going through my head. It was like, oh, it had to be tough. Had to be tough.
Yeah, it was. I didn't go back to my high school reunion, and I was even tempted to do it, but it wasn't my favorite time of my life.
Oh, well,
Never been back either.
Let me one up you, sir. At least you were invited to your reunion.
Well, I won't ask why.
I have no idea. They never contacted me.
Maybe they just couldn't find you. Did you move away or something?
Are you an hour down the road, maybe?
I'm about an hour down the road. I want to say I went all CIA and they couldn't find me. I'm in witness relocation. I'll just go with that.
No, well, that's in he has a better story. Mine is just I got added to one of their Facebook groups and realized I was like, oh, it had been around for 8 years, my graduating class Facebook group, before I was added. So yes,
Wow.
we're not the most popular folks in high school, so we completely understand and empathize.
So thinking about, you went professional in high school, but as you got into it, was there anybody that you looked at? Did you have anybody that you were like, well, kind of thinking about, because some people talk about Bergen and things like that, but obviously you went a little bit different. But were there any icons that you pointed to, or that you said, oh, I really like what they do?
Well, most of them you probably wouldn't know. There were major people in the puppet industry that worked with marionettes, but they were from an early, the height of their productions were in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And so if I say them, most people wouldn't have any idea who they were. But of course, I was aware of Bill Baird was very much present when I was growing up. And one of my early puppetry books that I was given was The Art of the Puppet by Bill Baird. And of course, there was Sid and Marty Krofft on television. And they were doing some marionette work here and there. And later I discovered a puppeteer named Tony Urbano. And that was the real changer for me, because not only did he make these beautiful marionettes, but his manipulation, I thought, of them was outstanding. And actually, he was the only one I applied to work with when I graduated from college with a theater degree. And he hired me. I sent him a videotape of my show. He hired me just on the basis of that and sent me a ticket to fly me out to California. And I ended up working for him for the next 8 years. And that was my advanced theater degree. That was my graduate work, I would say.
I don't think that you're not amazing, but you're also, that's incredibly lucky. Or I'm not trying to, but that they just flew you there and you worked for the next 8 years. What an opportunity.
Yes, it was. It was tremendous. I'm so grateful for it. And that was the only time he ever did that. He told me he probably would never take a chance on something like that again, sending him a plane ticket to come out. But it worked out great because I was his production supervisor and his lead puppeteer for a good many years.
Out of curiosity, what was your show on the VHS tape?
Right.
It was just my variety show. And that was pretty early on for VHS. It was a reel-to-reel. And Tony was working on a television show called Dusty's Treehouse, which was syndicated nationally, but didn't hit all markets, I think. But anyways, he took the videotape to the studio and played it there on their equipment because he didn't have even something to show this reel-to-reel video. And so that's it. Hired me from that.
What year was this? When did you graduate, if you don't mind?
That was 1973.
1973. Okay. So 73, right out of college. Walks right into what you would be doing for basically the rest of your life.
Yes.
8 years.
Yeah. And 8 years of working with him, and then I was ready to start my own company after that, which I did.
So let's talk about some of the things that you did while you were there. What were some of your experiences? What were some of your best experiences?
Oh, gee, it was wonderful because, see, he was doing that television show, Dusty's Treehouse, so I got to appear on that. I think I did about 20 episodes on that at various times. He was doing television commercials. He was getting all kinds of commercials coming in with all types of puppets. Again, rarely for marionettes because it was mostly Muppet-style puppets. Because the Muppets were super big at that point, and so every commercial wanted to have a Muppet puppet on it. And so I did a lot of that type of work at that point. And then he was doing, of course, just stage shows, different places for industrials and for company picnics. And at one point I was working up in Canada for him for an entire summer, doing shows in a theme park up there. I worked at Busch Gardens when they had a theme park in Van Nuys, California. And I was doing 6 to 8 shows a day, 7 days a week with that. So I had all kinds of experience of performing, and really, it was probably some of the best grunt work that I could do to become a professional puppeteer and learn all the aspects of it. He did a couple of films. We were doing special effects for some B-grade horror films where you would fly little bats, vampire bats, and things like that. But it was nothing quite like what I was able to do later on my own. So there was just a little bit of the film work. He hadn't done, later he went on to do Men in Black, of course, and Short Circuit, and a lot of other things like that. So a lot of really good film work that he did do, but I wasn't part of it.
What was the commercial that we might know? What was the most famous?
Oh, gee, well, we did commercials for McDonald's, for 7-Up. There was the 7-Up Undeer commercial, and so the Undeer puppet was like a costume character. We did commercials for the California Milk Advisory Board. Again, it was huge costume characters. I was in a huge character that was a 2-headed milk drop, and pro and cow. So I was working these 2 heads up over my head, wearing a costume that was about 50 pounds by itself and incredibly hot. And so there was another experience. And ooh, I don't know, there was just countless ones I can't remember. For Sears, a lot of commercials for Sears with tools. They were little tools that would talk and run around that were rod puppets.
I was just curious, and you've got to give me at least one of the movies, because you might be surprised just how much shit we have consumed.
He Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and he did a film called Chosen Survivors that I was working on. That was the vampire bat one, and we had to rig all these little bats and pin them to people, and then they'd run strings off, and so the bats would be wiggling around when the people were screaming. And
well, now I want to see it.
I've never seen it. I don't.
You've never seen it. You just was no interest.
I was too busy. I had no social life while I was working for him, I can tell you. I was building puppets, and I was performing, and I was training other puppeteers. I was production supervisor for him for the last couple of years. That meant that every puppeteer that came in and worked for him, I was in charge of training them. I knew every single role in every single one of his shows, and I could step into those roles as needed. In a theme park or industrial or whatever was called upon.
So you were the understudy for every single role that was going on. Just if anything happened, you stepped up and took that is a lot to keep in your mind.
Yes. Yeah. Well, again, most of them were variety characters. So it wasn't like I had to memorize a lot of lines and things like that.
I totally get now what you were talking about your master's. This is basically you were getting your PhD. This is your terminal degree, though, doing it 8 or 9 years like that.
Absolutely. It was.
Yeah.
And then I worked for the Muppets right after that. I got to work on the John Denver Christmas special with the Muppets. And
well, we were getting there. So talk to us about it. Tell us, how did you know the Henson Company? Of course you would have known them, but did you meet Jim before you actually worked for him? I would imagine you ran in the same circles.
I had seen him at puppet festivals. There's an organization called Puppeteers of America, and they hold a national festival. Now it's every other year. It used to be every year. And he attended a couple of those. And I actually saw him when he discovered, shoot, I forgot his name. But anyway, he came to some festivals, and I didn't meet him to talk to him. Again, I was too shy. But somebody I did know was Frank Oz's parents.
How did you know Frank Oz's parents?
Because they were also really good friends with Tony Urbano. Tony Urbano was almost like a foster brother of Frank Oz. They grew up together, and Tony stayed at his house a lot, evidently, and things. And so when I went up to do shows in the San Francisco, Oakland area where they lived, then I would go up and stay with them. And his mother was also the chief costume. She was a professional couturier, and she just made the most incredible costumes for Tony's puppets. So I knew her through that as well. But Frank Oz's father, Mike Osnowitz is the actual name. I said to him at one point, well, I'd really like to have an opportunity to work with the Muppets. And they incidentally were people that were my references when Tony was thinking of hiring me. And they knew me from puppet festivals. And the funny thing is that Tony called them up and he said, well, what about this kid, Philip Huber? What do you think of him? And Francis said, oh, he's such a nice boy. And that was my reference. What a wonderful puppeteer I was. But anyway, coming back to that, Mike went to Jim Henson at one point and said, I know this guy that would really like to have an opportunity to work with the Muppets. And so if something comes up, maybe you might throw it that his way. And he did, because the John Denver and the Muppets, A Christmas Together, was done in Los Angeles. And of course, they were all based out in New York at that time and London. And so he wanted to hire at least one puppeteer from the area because it would be cheaper for them, number one. So there were 12 puppeteers working on that show, and I was the 12th puppeteer brought in, sight unseen by Jim. And I worked the entire week with all the original Henson puppeteers. And it was a fantastic experience working with John Denver and everybody. And
oh,
I'll never forget it.
You've got to tell us the story about John Denver just being an ass.
Oh, no. No, he was the nicest guy. He would invite you into his dressing room. He had the puppeteers sitting around in there, and we'd all be talking and laughing about things and stuff in between times. But I love to go on the set and actually watch the puppeteers work. Because again, you know, I was trying to absorb everything I could. So when Jim Henson and Frank Oz would be working together, I had to be on the set to watch them. And they rarely kept with the script. I would have the script book in front of me watching it, and I'd go, where are they? Because too busy improvising. And John, you know, he would get the giggles, especially working with Miss Piggy. Because Frank Oz would go, oh, John, I just, so, and she just go on, and then you just get the giggles, and the whole scene would be something totally different than you were expecting, and nothing that was written in the script at that point. So,
yeah, and that's one of the things that I've always had with Muppets and puppets. Is there is so much improvisation. Like, you know, I remember a few years ago with the Happy Time Murders, that was Melissa McCarthy, who is a renowned improv artist, saying she could not keep up with Brian Henson and the rest of the puppeteers. And that's just something my brain has never been able to fully get around, because there is so much artistic skill required with being a puppet. You would think they would have to stay to a specific script and not even go off it. Like, everything has to be timed and maneuvered in a specific way.
I'm with Chad on this. It's exact the question I was about to ask you. I'm glad Chad asked it. Yeah. How does one, is it just muscle memory? How do you do that? How do you perform with a puppet and be able to go off script and improvise?
well, you realize they've been working with those characters usually for years. They know those characters inside and out. They've been doing the voice and things like that. So it becomes second nature to them. And they're not extremely complex puppets. Some of them have some animation in the head, but it's very easy to operate animation with their fingers and things. And they just understand these characters so well. And that's really what every puppeteer has to do. You have to get so used to the puppet that you aren't thinking about any of the mechanics. You're living through that puppet at that point. You become that personality. You're seeing things through those puppets, through the puppet's eyes, and you're experiencing it all at that moment. So improvising is just like the next step to it. It's just easy. They can go off in that character, do whatever they want to do with it. And the great Muppet puppeteers, they all do that. They're so brilliant with improvisation. Now, that's not a strong point for me. And that's a reason that I didn't end up working with the Muppets, even though Jim gave me an actual audition at the end of that entire week of working with the Muppets. And I had already been on camera and done all the things I needed to do, but he just had me come into his dressing room with Scooter, put Scooter on.
Oh, man.
Well, Scooter is an established personality. So I was like going, well, wait a minute, I can't do anything other than what Scooter do, but I did my best and it was horrible. And Frank Oz was invited in to watch it as well. Well, Frank has not as much patience as Jim had. Jim was the most low-key, really wonderful guy to work with in show business. Never known anybody quite like him. But Frank is not that way. He doesn't have a lot of patience. So he sat there for just a few minutes of my audition. He got up and walked out.
Which is shocking because the man is Yoda.
That's true. I never thought about it.
He's the epitome of calm.
So, in this interview,
he's also Miss Piggy, and he's also all these other characters that aren't.
And Grover. Yeah, you got a point. Yeah.
He is a performer, but it is slightly in this interview is about you, but it's hard because you see so many documentaries, you see so many people who talk about Jim Henson. We've met people who probably met Jim Henson. I've never heard a bad story about Jim Henson. And you think, how is that possible? Because you could talk, and I don't think I'm a horrible human being, but I'm sure if you walk down the street, thanks, Chad. 5 minutes, you can find at least 4 people that would tell you how I have wronged them in some past Chad in some way.
So was it audio listeners? I am waving my hand vigorously.
Today's Chad's birthday, by the way.
Oh, we had a whole conversation.
Yes, happy birthday.
Well, then I'm sorry. Today's not Chad's birthday. He's lying to you. Drop dead Chad. So what you're telling me is it's all real. It was all true.
Yes.
He was really
Jim
that man.
Very close to the character of Kermit. He was really laid back and just wonderful and the nicest person I want to meet.
That's my follow-up. How does someone become that successful in the entertainment industry and have that personality?
I don't know. That was the magic of it. You know, he could work with people and he didn't get flustered. I never saw him flustered or impatient about anything that was going on the set. It was just like, oh, we'll find a way to deal with it. You know, we'll do this, we'll do that. And something, and he could do that. And boy, I love that. You don't run into too many people in show business that are like that. Now, I've been fortunate. I've worked with a lot of very nice people in show business. Only a few that I wouldn't want to work with again. But for the most part, very nice people, but almost nobody as patient and quiet as Jim.
Again, I don't want to dwell too much on Henson, because we're here for you. But I do want to ask, even though you were in LA when you met him, but you did work on the Muppet movie, did you ever actually get an opportunity to visit the Henson workshop?
No, I didn't. Okay. Yes, and I did not work on the Muppet movie, actually. I don't know.
Oh, IMDb is incorrect.
Where it came from. A lot of puppeteers did, especially in Los Angeles. They brought them all in to be extras on the first Muppet movie. I was not around. I was working for Tony at that point, and I was off somewhere, so I didn't do that.
Damn you, IMDb!
Yes, did you know that that's on IMDb?
No.
It is. It's listed as a credit for you.
Yeah, it says uncredited.
Yes, sir. Go on IMDb. It says uncredited. And it does not. I don't think it has the John Denver Christmas special.
It does.
Okay.
It does.
Yeah, it should have that, but it shouldn't have the Muppet movie.
Oh, just take it. Now, just tell us a story about how you were there when their fork was put into the road.
Yeah, that's
just make something.
actually Yeah, you wrote the entire show from what I've heard now.
Tell us you basically, Frank was doing coke with Miss Piggy, which was weird because she's a puppet, and you had to take over.
You
Well, all I
mentioned
have to say is I was in that final scene in the Muppet movie where there's hundreds of Muppets, and I was probably 6 rows back, and 2, because every other puppeteer in Los Angeles was in that, I can tell you.
Oh, we apologize, but we promise when we do our research on people, IMDb is fairly correct, and we're sorry about that.
I do want to ask. I do want to ask a question though. Speaking of Christmas specials, you worked with Jim Nabors on some holiday specials, correct?
Talk about another wonderful man. Wow.
I had to ask that because I, like most Americans, grew up on a diet of the Andy Griffith Show and everything else. And that's what I learned to ask.
That wasn't bad, sir. Good job, Philip. Good job.
He was a joy to work with. I worked with him for 10 years straight in Hawaii. Yeah, I was flown out every Christmas time, and he would do this show out of the goodness of his heart. He was never paid for it, but it was a big, huge Christmas production show, kind of like the Rockettes, except it was mainly Hawaiian themed. But he would bring in guest artists, and I was a guest artist that he brought in every year for 10 years. And just the nicest guy to work with, and very, very professional. You know, there was nothing wishy-washy what was going on. It was cut and dried professional, but so nice about how he dealt with it all.
So was this for charity?
Well, I don't know. There were some charities, but a lot of it was just because of all of the entertainment people in Hawaii. And a lot of them were students. There would be students that were learning the hula and all these other things. And these groups would come on, and singing groups in Hawaii, and they would be in the show. And it was the Honolulu Symphony in the show, and just good friends of his. Jimmy Borges. I'm getting to the point where I'm really bad with names.
That's okay.
I can't think of all the names.
I was just thinking how nice it would be to go to Hawaii every year around Christmas for a few days.
Fantastic. Yeah. And it was at the Hawaii Theater, which is an old historic theater. And part of it was to help the theater as well.
Yeah.
Because they kept trying to do more and more restoration work in the theater. So it was for the community. It's a gift to the community and a gift to the people that were working in the show as well.
And you don't have a story about him just freaking out or anything. You meeting all these nice folks. You can't tell us one story about Gomer just walking off the set screaming.
No. I did have to work with somebody in that show that shall remain nameless that was brought in only 1 year. And he was supposed to do something with one of the puppets that I had, a marionette that I had. And he wouldn't learn the lyrics to the song. And it was within a few days of opening night, and he still hadn't learned it. And I know Jim took him aside and said something to him. All of a sudden, he learned those lyrics. So Jim would not tolerate unprofessional attitude. That was one thing. And he apologized to me. He even came to me and apologized that situation happened. But see, those kind of things are really kind of rare, because when people are working in these types of situations, they're professionals. And
right.
So it's all working beautifully.
Right. I'm sorry. I thought Chad had something. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so I was, I'm going to skip ahead to, your work on Being John Malkovich, because the puppetry work in Being John Malkovich is nothing but amazing and beautiful. And,
thank you.
Your collaboration with Spike Jonze. I mean, how did Spike Jonze have a true passion for puppetry?
It's interesting. No, I don't think he did. But, whenever puppeteers work in the film industry, usually they have to train the directors, the producers, and everybody on how puppets work, what are their strong points, and how to use them. And Spike was no different. He didn't really understand, you know, what the limitations might be or things like that, but he knew what he liked when he saw it. And it's quite an involved story. I don't know how he found out about me, except that I had sent a tape to his father-in-law, Sophie Coppola.
Francis.
Yeah, Francis Ford Coppola. Thank you.
We know who he was married to at the time. So you were looking for Big Papa Francis.
I sent a tape to him because he was supposed to be doing a production, a film of Pinocchio. And I thought, oh, well, maybe he'll need a puppeteer that's good with marionettes. But nothing ever came of it. But I have no idea. All of a sudden, the producer and Spike, they called up, and I was living in Pasadena, California at the time. And they called up and they wanted to come visit me. They wanted to see my workshop, and they wanted to talk to me about marionettes and see what I did. And so I said, sure. I invited them there, and they came. And my workshop was my garage. And it's interesting because in the film, of course, the workshop that the character of Craig Schwartz was supposed to have was supposed to be his garage too. So they photographed my entire garage and everything to see what it looked like as a puppet workshop.
Wow.
I started showing Spike what I was doing with the puppets, and he was fascinated by it. And I had a little Perot on a tightrope that moves really lyrically and gracefully, and he was just blown away by that character. And I had a violinist who plays the violin, and he goes down on one knee and plays and stuff. And he had toes there was a joint in the front of his toes, and Spike was interested in that and stuff. And all these things ended up going into the film eventually, but these types of qualities and jointing and things like that. And basically, he was offering me the job after he had spent an hour or so with me. And I said, oh, well, I would really like to see the script and everything. So they sent the script to me, and I read it. And my God, the script was so crazy.
Yeah.
Off the wall. And I was expecting something like The Sound of Music. Bill Bear did with the... I thought, oh, there's going to be this wonderful marionette scene. So I do all this beautiful stuff. And it was all this really weird stuff and demanding in what it was describing in the script. And I didn't know quite what to make of it. But the reason I liked it is because the puppetry in there was respected, even though they made fun of it. Characters in the film made fun of the puppeteers. The puppetry itself was respected. And it was respected enough that it was being shown at Lincoln Center in New York and things like that. He was working in ballet. And when Malkovich finally got his career in puppetry. So, and other actors were saying, oh, well, we could have been puppeteers too, but we just didn't bandwagon fast enough and all of that. So that part of it I really liked. So I said, yeah, I'm really interested in doing this. But the problem was he contacted me only about 3 months, I think, before he was going to start principal photography. In that time, I would have to build all of the puppets. I would have to rehearse all the numbers involved, which were very elaborate. And I would have to train the actors to be able to hold the puppets properly. And I didn't think it was enough time for me to do it. I'm not that fast of a builder, and I didn't have that elaborate of a workshop to bring a lot of people in. And that was the problem. And he also wanted this all to happen when I was already booked. I was in Europe working at the Lido in Paris, and doing some other things too, off on cruises as well. I was doing the inaugural of the Disney Magic cruise ship.
Oh.
Like that. So I had these commitments already. And I said to him at the time, you really should wait and do all of the marionette stuff by itself after you've done principal photography with the actors. And no, he didn't want to do that because it would be cheaper if they could just set up the puppet setup off to one side And when they were changing lights on the main set with the actors, they could come over and do the puppet stuff. And he thought, you just go really fast and you just do that stuff. And I said, no, this is really complicated stuff. You're going to want to have this dedicated. Everybody needs to be dedicated working on this. And, but anyway, I wasn't available for the time period. So he held a great cattle call. He didn't hire any of the puppeteers from the cattle call. He ended up hiring puppeteers that had done mostly stop motion puppets. They hadn't done marionettes. But anyway, they built the marionettes. They did the show. And I went off and did what I did. And then I forget, several months later, I get a call and he says, I'd like you to come work on the film. And I thought, oh, maybe he wants me to come in and do some sweetening. But basically, I had just written it off. I thought I was perfect for doing the film. I thought I had all the experience that would be needed for that film. And but anyway, it wasn't mine. And when he called me up, I was really surprised. So I said, well, I didn't build the puppets, so you need to send them to me so I can check them out. Because a puppet that's not well made, there's nothing you can do with it to make. And he did. He sent me the puppets, and he sent me a videotape of the Dance of Despair and Disillusionment with John Malkovich, but mostly his stunt double doing it, because it had a forward somersault, a back handspring, wall walks, all these things in that. Now, the other thing I had said to Spike at the beginning, I said, let me build the puppets and we'll work out the routine with the puppets, what they can do best. And I'll show you all their best moves. And then you choreograph that into a routine. And then you have the dancer and John just learn that and do that. And then it'll be an exact match. Well, it ended up exactly the opposite. They did an elaborate routine, and then they were trying to get the puppets to do it, and the puppets couldn't do it. So I looked at this and I said, well, I think I can get just about everything except the forward somersault and back handspring. Said, as far as I know, that's impossible to do with a marionette. And he said, well, just do your best. And he turned the puppets over to me and I had to rebuild them. They weren't right. And then he set up the whole set in my garage and I could rehearse with it. And he, meanwhile, had gone off and he was working on another film. I think it was called Three Kings.
Yeah.
He was in Arizona on location with that.
Yep.
And he would fly back and he'd make an appointment, come in to see what I was doing. And I would show him what I did with the marionettes at that point. And he'd say, well, I like this, but I want this way and that way and stuff. And then off he'd go. And anyway, I worked on it all for several months. They just gave me freedom to do that. And then I got everything except the forward somersault and back handspring. And I said, well, let's line up the studio and go ahead and go in and film. And I'll just do the best I can with what I have. And 3 days before I was due to go into the studio, it came to me how to do those two actions with a marionette. And there was a separate marionette that was going to be the stunt double. And I kind of rigged it up with the hands wired into position and stuff like that. I figured out a control for it and I strung it and it worked the first time. And just by reversing what I did, I could get the back handspring from a forward somersault. Wow. Well, I went in and we started shooting and we did the whole dance of opening of the film in the studio. And then we did the little love scene between the two puppets sitting on the edge of the stage, Maxine and Craig sitting and talking. And that went really well. And then he was like super happy with everything. And he went off and then they did a test editing of the film and they put in all the stuff I had created and they tried to do a scene on the street with stuff the other puppeteers had done. And evidently in the test, it didn't work because people saw a difference. They said, well, we don't understand. He was a good puppeteer here. All of a sudden, he's kind of clumsy puppeteer.
I mean, it's awful for the budget, but doesn't it just warm your heart a little bit?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, it is one of the most beautiful moments in the movie is just seeing that puppetry work, that marionette work.
Thank you.
I mean, it's just stunning. So, let me ask you a question, because you said Spike Jonze really he had an idea, but he didn't understand the marionette work. Do you think that is true with most people in Hollywood who want to work with marionettes? Because you think of Team Police or Team America with Trey Parker, and they said, after that movie, they will never, ever work with marionettes again.
That's right. They had no idea what they were doing, and they did so many things wrong, I could tell you, but I won't because.
Well, hold on. Is that the Kyoto brothers that did that?
Yeah, Chiodo brothers.
Chiodo? I'm sorry. Okay, I always say it wrong. The Chiodo brothers that did Team America.
Because I mean, when you compare Team America, even it's a funny movie. It has it's an entertaining movie, but then you compare the puppetry work in Team America to Being John Malkovich, and you're looking at two different things. I mean, you're looking at one that's absolute art, and one that's built up for a fart joke. So,
well, thank you. That makes me feel good, because I tried to raise the bar really high with Being John Malkovich, and so I hoped that it would stay there, that people would suddenly recognize that marionettes really could be actors on the screen. And it is interesting, because I got the role in Oz the Great and Powerful because Sam Raimi watched Being John Malkovich. It was recommended to him that I might work to do the Charm Girl as a marionette on set, and he watched Being John Malkovich, and he said to me that the day I went in there to do a screen test with the puppets, he said, "I saw your work in Malkovich." He said, "It was really moving." He said, "It was incredible." And that was just a wonderful compliment to hear from this director that I admire so much.
Well, I have some Sam Raimi questions, but I'm not there yet, because Sam Raimi is my favorite director. But
well, he's my favorite director right now too, because I loved working with him.
We've never met anyone who didn't, and we've met everyone in the hemisphere around him, right, gentlemen? We've just never met Sam Raimi, and but I'll get to that in a second. I'm along with Chad. I don't know there's something about Spike, but it's not you. I think that movie, with anything less, it's the marionettes that make the absurdity work. And I don't know how else to put it. Don't get me wrong. There's wonderful performances in there by the actors. And John Malkovich probably is also a linchpin of that film, of how he pulls it off.
Yeah.
But it's the marionettes being so beautifully executed that you can't laugh like you would at Team America. And I don't mean that in a bad way to them. I'm with Chad. I love Team America as well. It's a different kind of movie. You're not allowed to laugh at the absurdity of that because of the marionettes.
Yeah. Well, Spike said to me, I mean, the reason he kept coming back and the reason he had me come into the film and redo everything, he wasn't happy with what he saw. And he'd actually come to see me perform live with my variety show. So he knew what the marionettes were capable of. So if he didn't see that in the film, he wasn't going to be happy at that point. He had a litmus test for what he wanted to see. And so I appreciated that. And he was very particular about, I want Craig to look like he's the most incredible puppeteer in the world. And when I had originally told him I couldn't do the forward somersault, I said, you have to stop camera halfway, and I will then clear the strings, and then I can bring the puppet out of it. He said, no, I really need this. I need Craig to be the most incredible puppeteer you've ever seen. So that was what I was working for.
Out of curiosity, did you just go and see, well, maybe I can file better than John Cusack? Did you go and try filing?
No.
Go ahead, James.
I wanted to ask a question because as you design these marionettes, I know you've also, I believe, designed marionettes of people that are very much alive and very, very based on real people. Dolly Parton, I believe you did a marionette for Dolly.
Yes, yeah, for the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville.
Yeah, so how do you approach, is it a different way you approach when you're thinking about what a marionette's going to be if it's based on somebody that, I would imagine Dolly may have saw that. So, is there a different way you approach it when you think about, or does it change anything about how you approach creating the marionette?
Well, if I do a marionette that's a portrait of somebody, I don't do it to make fun of them. I always do it because I admire those people and I want to do it as a tribute to them. And so you have to be careful. You don't trade on somebody's professional name. So even when I have portrait puppets in my own show, they aren't the professional name of that person. Sometimes it's close or it's something clever that's kind of fun about it. But I don't trade on their professional name. But I do it obviously to do it as a tribute to them. So that's my approach to it. And so the things I do are not extreme caricatures. I usually flatter the people as well.
So I know you did Dolly Parton. I believe you did Hank Williams as well.
Yes, Hank Williams Sr.
Yes,
when he was young. Yeah,
I saw some of those, and they really are. It actually made me think, what do I have to do to get famous enough to get to that level where somebody's like, you know what we're going to do? So I just saw those, and I was amazed, and it's really, and so I had that question about, what's the difference between creating based on someone versus creating something that is your own creation. So,
well, what's unique about the marionettes is they aren't built to be just a generic marionette with a face that looks like somebody. They're built to be that personality. So what I do is I watch the movements of that person. I try and get inside their personality and character, and then I actually build the puppet to perform in that style. And you do things with the jointing sometimes that causes them to move in a particular way. Now, when I saw Hank Williams Sr. on stage as a young man performing, he was really, really animated. And that's why I said, oh my God, I have to do the marionette of him for this show, because I thought he was just incredible on stage, and I knew that I could get that type of action in the marionette.
Let's jump a little bit. I have a question. So you worked for 8 or 9 years, and then you started your own business. So
yes.
How did you do that? That takes a lot. As a son of a former of a small business owner, people don't realize just what misery that is.
Thought you were getting ready to break into when I was a son of a preacher, man. I was like, oh,
the only one who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher. Anyway, so what misery that can be. I mean, everybody talks about it being your own boss, but it also means that if you didn't get work this week, you didn't eat. You didn't make any money, right? There's not someone paying you continuously. You're not on someone else's payroll.
Yeah. In show business, you can multiply that times 2, and puppeteer, you can multiply it times 10. It's really hard because puppeteers they sometimes have to find their market. They aren't just given a market. I worked at the Magic Castle in Hollywood, and I was the first marionette operator, I think, to perform there, because I had to almost force my way in. I had to bug them so much that they finally auditioned me and wanted me in there. And going back to Europe, I mean, there was a period of time when variety marionettes were extremely popular in Europe, and they were all over the place. And then they disappeared completely. So nobody knew about them. So I had to try and open up that market again for myself when I got into Europe, working in variety theaters in Germany and in cabarets and nightclubs in France and in Switzerland as well. So, yes, it's really hard to start your own company, and you're doing just about whatever you can. But at the same time, I started this with my partner, David Alexander, and he really admired what I did, but he felt I had a special market, and that was an adult market, not a children's market. And the children's market is what everybody tries to force you into if you're a puppeteer. You're offered children's birthday parties, you're offered bar mitzvah parties, all of these things, and that's it. And instead, I wanted to be performing. I performed touring in Florida in the senior centers and things like that. But I also finally got onto cruise ships. And cruise ships is an adult market, especially the ships that I was working on. They were the high-end ships. There were no children on these ships. They were wealthy people who can afford to do world cruises and stay on the ships for a long period of time. And they've seen everything. They're very jaded. They go to Broadway shows at a regular basis. And so they don't accept junk, even though cruise ship entertainers had a reputation sometimes of being the entertainers that were on their way down or on their way up. And I guess I was on my way up, but still I maintained a good living. I worked for 35 years on the ships and made a very good living with that. And then in between, I was allowed to do the movies and the stage work that I did, the Broadway show with Tommy Tune, Oscar Alley, and all sorts of things like that. So the ships kept me on a steady basis because I could get onto a ship almost any time. And then they changed. Then suddenly they bring in new entertainment directors and they go, why would I bring on puppets?
Mm-hmm.
Aren't interested in puppets. It doesn't matter that you've already been working on these ships for years and you're one of the highest rated acts. All of a sudden, this new entertainment director, no, you're not appropriate. So
Right.
there you go. I'm off ships. But actually, I was bumped off the ships right before the COVID-19 came in, so it's just fine. I guess.
Well, I've got to ask. So you were from Northern Illinois. I don't know your background, but it doesn't sound like you were a world traveler growing up. This is at least to give you the chance you've seen the world, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I never expected to be able to do this. No, my father died when I was 8 years old. My mother raised me as a single parent. We never had a lot of money. We were really scraping by. I mean, when I was charging 25 cents for kids to come in and see my show, well, that was my spending money that I would earn from that. So no, I was not a world traveler. I had a good friend who was, and I thought, oh, how grand that he got to see all these things around the world. But once I started on ships, I've been to almost every place where a ship can port. I've been to those countries. And even the last one I got to go to was Antarctica, right towards the end of my career on ships. So that was a great experience for me. But yeah, I'm so grateful that I've been able to do that.
I haven't been on. I'm sorry, James. Go ahead.
Well, I was actually going to say, and that was actually, you mentioned doing marionette work in Europe and all of that. That actually was something I wanted to bring up was, what is it? Because my son, one of his favorite places to go when we're in Atlanta, it's the Center for Puppetry Arts there, I believe.
Yes.
We love that.
There.
We love that place. And and matter of fact, when I said I was interviewing someone who did marionette work, my son is 8, and he goes, "Can I come?" And I'm like, "No." I was like, "You'll be able to watch it later." But what is it about? Because that's what I think my son realized the first time we took him to the Center for Puppetry Arts. Puppets are international. Marionettes are, there's something about this that it cuts across language, it cuts across cultures, and that's one of the things he loved, walking through that center and seeing, oh, this is from Japan and this is from. So what is it in your experience that you can go to Europe and it cuts across that? It lowers cultural barriers. What about puppetry does that?
Well, it is universal. Almost every country has a history of puppetry. Some of them have lost track of their history of puppetry. And some countries, the history of puppetry is not old enough for them to think of it in terms of true theater, which is part of the problem of the United States. It tended to be that puppetry was thought of as, oh, it goes into the schools, school assembly programs or parties, or else it was just for television and children's television shows. And as much as I love the Muppets, but Sesame Street, of course, establishes that again. And that's why Jim wanted to do things like the Muppet Show, because he knew that puppetry was universal and for any age, but you had to get it out there in front of people for them to understand that. And it's still, I have a lot of places that wouldn't hire me in the United States because they think I'm going to be doing something for children.
So I want to ask a question. You mentioned 1930s marionette stuff was your inspiration. Are you familiar with the Lime Juice Mystery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's fun,
why don't you explain it to us? Because the other
we were going to get there. So the Lime Juice Mystery,
the other two assholes don't know what the lime juice mystery is. Other than Phillip, stuff, you put the lime in the coconut, you drink the bowl up. Past
Phillip,
that, I'm confused.
To be completely honest, when you mentioned 1930s movies was your inspiration, my brain started moving. I'm like, I know I saw a marionette movie when I was young about Japanese marionettes in an opium den. And while we've been talking, I've been looking for it, and I finally found it. It's called the Lime Juice Mystery, or the other title is who's the mystery of who stole grandfather's porridge.
Oh gosh, I couldn't come up with the subtitle. I'm sorry. They're Chinese, actually, not Japanese. Yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, it all takes place.
A detective story of the 1930s.
Philip, you correct the hell out of him.
Yeah, because I don't remember anything about it. I mean, I'm literally putting pieces together as I'm talking to you. And I just remember, the fact that there was like a big brawl. A marionette changes from a geisha to like this, like elaborate costume, and then there's a bunch of people a bunch of marionettes banging on drums, and I just remember it being stunning when I was younger. So I didn't know what your opinion was.
It's interesting, but for me, I'm so manipulation oriented and really fine manipulation. So it's hard for me because I see some of these older films and they were pretty loose and loosey-goosey with the marionettes, a lot of bouncing around and don't look like they're really walking at various times. And that bothers me. I appreciate the fact that sometimes they made beautiful puppets and they did lots of fun things with them. I just wanted to see that little bit more work with getting them so they were really refined and there was a puppeteer that worked in the early television, Mary Chase, and she married later and became Mary Chase Lombard. And I actually have one of her puppet heads behind me again under a glass case, but she created puppets that were Fearless Fosdick, and it's kind of on the same level, but these were in the 1950s. And she also did Little Abner, the comic strip Little Abner, all done with marionettes. Beautiful, beautiful marionettes. Now, she tried very hard to get good manipulation, and for the most part, there was. Every once in a while, there's something that will be a little bit awkward, but I prefer her stuff to even the lime juice one.
I'm sorry, it was just random. I literally had a flashback in my head because I was like while we were talking about John Malkovich. Man, don't even get started. Like I said, my movie watching history as a child was very messed up. So yeah, no, it was like because in my mind when I was thinking of marionette movies, I'm like, okay, there's Being John Malkovich, Team America. There's that intro scene in Private Parts. And then there was this black and white movie that I came up with, and I just couldn't. I while we were talking, I'm like, what is it? It was like an earwig that just couldn't get out of my head. So I had to bring it up to you.
There are 1930s films that they used marionettes in, which are very interesting to see. One is called I Am Suzanne, and the other is called Artists and Models.
Artists and Models.
And Artists and Models was done, all the puppeteers were working on a bridge that was 30 feet up in the air in a studio under those hot lights that they had back then. And the strings were so long on the puppets that they actually had to anticipate the movement for choreography. They had to anticipate if the puppet was speaking to pull the string like half a second or a second before, because the stretch of the string would delay the movement of the puppets below. I can't even imagine what
sounds awful.
But it's also high art. I mean, the artistry that went into that's amazing.
Yes, and they were large puppets. They were almost probably about 32 inches tall.
Just the actual, and this is something, and maybe it's just because I'm a big fat guy and I don't want to be uncomfortable, but, and this is a legitimate question. I started out, well, it's true, I am a big dude, but the physicality and keeping yourself, you're either doing this, you're doing that. I mean, it's all uncomfortable. You're never comfortable. And I wasn't going to ask it at first, but you just brought that up, and I can't let it go because...
I was going to ask, so how the hell do you tie your shoes nowadays?
Well, it's not necessarily that, but you have to be, I wouldn't say I don't know if you have to be in shape, but you're never comfortable doing your art.
Yeah, you have to be in good shape. You have to keep yourself flexible. I do stretching exercises all the time when I'm performing before any show. And when I was working on the set for Oz the Great and Powerful and for Being John Malkovich, yeah, I was doing those kind of exercises as well, because yeah, you're
never comfortable.
Time and holding the puppets, and sometimes the great thing about when I worked with Oz the Great and Powerful is that they understood what it took, and they would actually have like the assistant director would bring in a C-stand and set it up so that I could clamp the control of the puppet in that, so that they could just do the lighting with the C-stand holding the puppet instead of me standing there for hours holding the puppet while they got light.
While James Franco was off in his trailer writing his next novel and working on 3 other movies and doing live poetry readings all at the same time.
He always had his face in a book, always, when he wasn't on set, when he wasn't on camera.
But, so that leads me, I want to say the appreciation of the physicality of that job, I just can't imagine.
Well, the interesting thing is, again, Sam Raimi understood that, and he knew enough about puppetry working with special effects, I guess, in the Spider-Man films and things like that.
Evil Dead. The man started out with the Evil Dead, the Evil Dead trilogy. I mean, they're all puppets.
Yeah. The first day I was on the set, he had me meeting with all the set people, and they were to work out where I needed to stand to be able to work China Girl at various times for the scenes, and where they might have to remove parts of the wall, and I would have to reach through the wall to work her and things like that. And he was always trying to have that thing set out ahead of time so I wouldn't be in a bad situation where I would be waiting a long time in an uncomfortable position and stuff like that. And I did have to work all different ways of hanging through walls, and at one point they did have me way up on the top of the set with a safety harness on, leaning over the edge and flying a monkey, because I had a monkey puppet that they also wanted to get some film on to use for Findlay as well. And it was an experience. I'm not great with heights, so I didn't enjoy that so much.
Well, I was about to say that just you saying that, my blood pressure went up, because I felt the same way about heights. I was like, no, we can't be doing that.
Yeah, well, especially when you're leaning like that. I mean, the tendency is you're just gonna go the rest of the way. You're gonna go right on over.
Wow.
Well, you told us how you got the job. Now's my time to say, what's your best Sam Raimi story? And we've heard some doozies. None of them are bad. It's just about his sense of humor and how great he was to work with.
Well, yeah, he's wonderful to work with, but he loves to give a lot of freedom to the actors to improvise. And so what you end up having to do, I mean, for me, I was trying to look at storyboards. I told him up front, I said, any storyboard you can give me, it's great, because then I find out what the marionette needs to do, and I can string it, especially for those movements before I come into the scene. But the tendency was that I would get into a scene and the other actors would want to improvise something, and then he'd say, okay, let's do it that way. And then he'd do the whole improvised scene, and I wouldn't have rehearsed anything. And one time there was a scene that was cut from the film because there was a lot of things that were changed. The China Girl was actually the protagonist. She was the hero, which is interesting, but later it went to Glinda instead, that position. But there was an early time where I was in this scene and she was performing, and she had to climb up the stairway and go into a wagon. And there were curtains on the back of the wagon, so she had to duck through these curtains and everything when she'd get up to the top. Well, the stairway was made out of a barrel and a box, and it was all irregular.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine if you're working a marionette and you're going up a regular stairway and you know the height of each one of the steps, so you can kind of start to get a rhythm going and get those feet to land where they need to go. And I started to rehearse with her on this stairway, and Sam came over to me and he said, "Oh, you know, we aren't going to have her go up that stairway." He said, "We're just going to cut and she's going to suddenly be up in the wagon." And I said, "Oh, great, you know, that makes it a lot easier for me." So I'm working on the scene and we're rolling with the cameras, and I have an earwig in, and he says into my earwig while I'm on the scene, he says, "Go ahead and go up the stairs." And so I might panic, but I go, "Okay," and she just goes. I fly with her, and she hit every one of the steps, and she dove through the curtains, and Sam yells, "Cut!" And the assistant director goes, "Can't get any better than that." And I just said, "What just happened?" You know, I couldn't have done it again if my life depended on it. But there it was. You do what you have to do under these circumstances.
Why is
more than one time where that happened, just because Sam would tell me something in my ear, and I would, okay, I have to try and do it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
why is he your favorite? Why was he your favorite director?
Because he really appreciated the work I was doing, and he let me know it. Within a week of me working on the set, he said, "I've fallen in love with her." And that's what a puppeteer wants to hear. Suddenly you've put a personality into this little inanimate thing, a personality that has come across, so that technicians on the set and Sam, they were looking at her as being real. Sam was directing her sometimes on the set, not me. He was talking to her, and the other actors would really get involved with her. And that was the point. She was there so the actors could really get involved with her as a personality, and not just as like a tennis ball on a stick, which is what usually happens with CG characters that are in a film.
Yeah, I was about to say that character is phenomenal. My wife is a huge Oz fan, the books and all of that stuff, and she loves that film. I think we have about 3 different versions on DVD, Blu-ray, and all of that stuff now. And there's something about, you know, when I heard Sam Raimi was going to do it, I was like, oh, Sam Raimi, and he kept something there. And I think not just using CG is something that Sam Raimi does well.
They wanted to use the marionette if possible, but the trouble is it was just too difficult. What you don't realize, you think, okay, I was in a blue screen outfit.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were wiping me out, the technicians there. They had all the equipment and stuff, and so they could show him a scene with me wiped out and stuff. But you had to wipe out the strings, you had to wipe out the shadows from the strings, my shadow, all these things that happen as well. And that's why there were very few places. The very first scene that China Girl appears in, part of that is the actual marionette. And then they put a CG face of Joey, who was the little girl who was actually the voice for China Girl. But part of that is the actual marionette, and that's the only place, really, because the rest of the time they just wiped her out and put on the CG character over it.
But they did use your movements, right? They just put the CG over it. Right.
Yeah, the performance that I gave, they did.
It's by performance capture.
Troy Saliba was the one that was in charge of the animation that was going to be in the film. And he's the one who had recommended me to Sam to begin with. And he was on set all the time, and he was watching what I was doing with the puppet. And he kept saying to me, wow, you know, you're giving the animators so much material to work with here. And Sam just had me go off, and they would record me doing everything with China Girl they could think of, just offset even. She would climb over things and stuff. So they would find out exactly how she moved in all these different situations.
Yeah.
Real quick, James, before you go, I do want to talk about China Doll for one moment, because she does have, in my terms, the best part in that whole movie.
She does have the best part in the whole movie.
Because every time I see her pull that knife, I still laugh. I've watched the movie 4 or 5 times. I got to tell you this story. One time, my daughter, Phillip, for the first time ever, she looked at me and says, "Daddy, I want to stay up all night with you." I said, "Okay, honey, we'll stay up all night." "Daddy, can we watch movies all night?" "Sure, honey." At the 12 p.m. midnight hour is when I introduced her to Frank, or the Oz, the Great and Powerful. And she was almost asleep. I'm like, I get to go to sleep. She's not going to make it. And then the knife comes out, and I'd make the biggest belly laugh, wake her up. I'm up for another 2 hours, but she loves the movie, and China Doll is her favorite part of that movie. So I had to tell you that story.
That's great. It's interesting because that little knife, I actually, I knew she had to do that. So I rigged a little knife. I actually made a little knife out of something, and I rigged it in her costume and stuff so that she could pull it out. And I showed Sam right before, and the guy who was in charge of props was standing there, and he goes, "Well, that's not the knife." He had made a beautiful little knife, so all of my work, I had to undo it, and I had to use the little prop. But
I'm telling you, there's a scene later. He would later go back and direct Ash versus Evil Dead, which is a Starz show, and he directed the pilot. There's a scene with a little doll that is almost completely China Girl right out of Oz the Great and Powerful. He just
no kidding.
Yeah, if you get a chance. If you get a chance, it's on if you have Netflix.
Okay.
Just watch the pilot. You do not strike me as a person who's into horror films. Just watch the pilot. Just watch the pilot just for that. You're gonna, and then feel free to email me or text me or something later going, "Joe, yeah, you're right," because he pulled it right out of it. Same thing.
Well, why didn't he hire me to do?
I don't know. You could have got to go to New Zealand. I'm pretty sure it was shot in New Zealand.
Oh yeah, I wrote to him at a time when he was in New Zealand. As a matter of fact, oh darn, yeah.
Well, hey, if you ever want to put in a good word for him doing Bonehead Weekly, just let us know, and then we'll let him know that you want to do more. So, joking aside, James, you had one other question.
I wanted to ask about. I was perusing your website, and I wanted to ask about Taffy, because you do have. So, can we get a little bit of story about Taffy, where Taffy came from, and why Taffy is so important?
Well, I grew up with dogs. I had a dog my parents got a collie when I was born, and I grew up with that collie. She was my guardian, and so I've always had an affinity with dogs. And I had built all these different marionettes, but I had never built a dog. So I decided to build this dog, and I did what I thought would be the perfect marionette. Little short, stubby legs, but long fur, ears that were floppy, but could perk up and have expression in them, and put those all together into a marionette. And I didn't know what to call it, and I asked my partner, David, I said, what do you think? What should I call this dog? And he looked at me and said, well, I think it looks like Taffy to me. And he didn't know, but the collie that I was raised with, her name was Taffy. And I said, perfect.
Great story.
And so that was my dog, and she went into the show, and she was an immediate hit, because on the cruise ships, people miss their pets. And she's a very realistic dog. She's not anthropomorphized in any way. She just does everything a real dog does. And and we would even take her around, and I would walk her through the audience during captain's farewell cocktail parties and stuff like that. She'd hop up in people's laps. And one passenger goes, "Oh, I'm allergic to dogs." And I'd say, artificial dogs.
That's the greatest compliment ever, isn't it, though?
Yeah, exactly. No, people would forget completely that I was there. And that was always the magic about her. And Tommy Toons saw her and put her in the musical Busker Alley in place of a trained dog. And the Sherman Brothers did the music, and they used to go out and like to listen to the audience during the intermission to what their comments would be. And Taffy had a wonderful musical number with a lady in the show, and Marcia Lewis is her name, and it was just a lot. It was called the Hula Love Song, and Marcia would be doing hula stuff, and the dog would be reacting to her. And at one point, she'd throw her hips, and the dog would fall over dead, and there would be like a rim shot with the drums, and then she'd go, "Hey!" and the dog would jump up again and start performing with her. And they were buskers on a street corner doing this, and it almost stopped the show every night with Marcia and the dog, and I love doing that. But anyway, Tommy, the minute he saw Taffy, he said, "That's Mate." Mate was the name of the character in the show, and she went in, and the Sherman Brothers, listening to people in the lobby, people would say, "How did they get that dog to do all of the choreography exactly with the music? Like I wasn't there." So
Great compliment.
dressed as a busker, but all in black. So I just kind of would blend into the shadows a little bit. But people accept the concept on stage. And if a puppet has enough life to it, then it doesn't matter what's going on around it. They believe in that character. And I've gotten cast as dogs ever since in theater shows. So I've done 3 different theater shows that had dogs in it, and Taffy has been in a couple of those. But the last one I did, it was a Labrador Retriever. So it was a large dog that I had to do as a marionette on stage. But the same type of thing, you deliver that performance as a dog, and people accept it. You don't exist as a puppeteer on stage.
Really quick, I have 2 last questions. First of all, Sherman Brothers, if our audience doesn't know, if you have a Disney song that you hum around, a classic Disney song, they wrote it. Second, I have 2 questions. One, do you hang out with the old Crow Medicine Show? Because I've seen them live probably 3 times.
No, I've never been able to hang out with them, but I would love to. I think what they do is wonderful.
Yeah, I love the band. Okay. I've got a hat down here that I sometimes wear that's an old crow. This is a really odd question. Wheel. Yes, this is an odd question because I've always been fascinated about cruise ships. I've had friends who've worked on cruise ships. You work what? 1-2 hours? What do you do? Do you go out and explore the rest of the time?
Yes, you're on your own.
Fantastic. No wonder you love
the ship, but usual ships you're a guest entertainer. So you come on and you have all the privileges of a guest, but you just do your shows. And I used to do a lecture as well, where it was called Behind the Strings, and I would talk about what I'm talking about with you. I would say what it was like to build the puppets. I would show the process of building in a video, and I would demonstrate the puppets that they'd seen during the week, and tell them, what is the process that I have to go through to get them to perform. And people loved that as much as my show. So that was an extra thing I would do on the ships. And then sometimes I would do these parties where I would Taffy around because, like I said, she became my goodwill ambassador. Everybody knows me from that dog. If I went on a cruise ship again and there were people on there who had seen me at some point, the first thing they would say is, "Where's Taffy?"
Right. It's fantastic. Sorry, I just had to ask that very obscure question. But all right, gentlemen, in the interest of time, we have any more? James, you got another question?
Real quick, I wanted to say, so you did the puppeteer work for a short film, Cosmic Fling, which I think is coming out this year. I saw that, and I was wondering, is that showing at film festivals, or where would that be?
Yes, it's going to be at the Newport Beach Film Festival coming up. It already won an award. I wish I could remember which festival it was, but it won Best Animated Short at a film festival. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Again, it was an experience of there were people involved trying to do a short film, and they were trying to figure out if they should do it with stop motion puppets or if they should do just animation, and then somebody suggested to them marionettes because it was a space film. And of course, marionettes can do all the floating and the anti-gravity look. And so I was asked to be a part of that, and I was really happy to do it. It was fun. And they sent me the puppet. Somebody else had built the puppet. So again, they sent me the puppet so I could do any modifications to it so that it worked exactly the way I wanted it to work and I would feel comfortable performing with it. All of the marionettes are finely tuned instruments.
Right.
So it's a matter of, I really have to tune something before I ever want to put it in front of a camera or in front of an audience. I want to make sure that it's going to be working exactly right.
Well, Philip, is there anything else you'd like to talk about or any other projects you have coming up? We will tweet the hell out of it.
Most of my projects have all been canceled. Unfortunately, I was going to be in Germany for a good portion of this year, and they've all been canceled or just postponed. I've done several times the Hansa Variety Theater in Hamburg. And it's one of the oldest variety theaters in the world. It's been going straight for 130 years. And it's all variety acts with an MC in the show. And they run the show for 5 months straight during the winter. So that's when everybody wants to go be inside. And I've done that 2 different contracts before, and I was scheduled to do it at the end of this year. And now they said, well, we're going to postpone it until October of 2021 because of the COVID, because obviously these smaller theaters, they can't open at all because they wouldn't be able to afford to do it.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, we moderate a lot for Comic-Cons and conventions, and our whole lives have been put on hold as well. I just got another cancellation about 2 hours ago. So
yeah, I worry about all my fellow artists. It's really tough right now.
It's tough.
Here's especially one puppeteer friend in Chicago, he's actually doing things that are like, it's like a telegram. And he's hired to go to a house. He's outside the house, outside the front porch. He sets up his little stage and he does a performance. And that's in Chicago. And he's now being hired to do that. So it's just like for the family in the house, they can come out on the porch and everybody can social distance and everything. And he can do his show. And
that's fantastic.
And a wonderful idea. And that's it. We have to be creative like that. And all I've been doing is I can't perform because I don't have the right equipment to present the things the way I would want to professionally. So I can't do my acts, but I can share what I do. I do these interviews. I do workshops as well, where I talk about puppets and how they work, and I demonstrate things and give exercises they can do with marionettes. So I want to keep the art alive and vibrant even during this time as much as possible.
So if someone wanted to schedule a workshop with you, could they would go to HuberMarionettes.com?
Well, yeah, they can do that. I haven't done that yet. I haven't really opened it up for private. It's through Handmade Puppet Dreams on Facebook that I did this workshop. And they tied it in with Cosmic Fling. So what they were trying to do was do a behind the scenes of the performers that are in the various puppet shorts that they've done. And so that's why they asked me to do this workshop, and now they've asked me to do another one. So I will do a progression. The first one was called a marionette manipulation primer. And this next one will be a little bit more advanced, but they're planning to re-air my first one right before it. So people can
be sure to share that
program.
Yeah.
And I also believe HuberMarionettes.com, you also do a merchandise section where somebody, if they needed their own taffy, is that available?
Yes, it is available. When we were doing the Broadway show with Tommy Tune, they wanted to be able to sell taffy marionettes out in the lobby, and we wanted that. And unfortunately, the show didn't make it all the way to Broadway. It closed right before because Tommy broke his foot when in the show. And so the whole show closed down because he was the star. Everything was built around him. But anyway, I continued to work on that, and I created a a simpler marionette, a commercially made marionette that works as a professional one though. And it has only 11 strings. Taffy herself has 20 strings, but it's a lot simpler to use. And so we put that together, and it took about 6 years to develop this and have them mass produced. Mm-hmm. And each one had to be handmade in the United States. So I was sure that they would work right. And I test each one and then sign the control. But we sell those. They're called Pick of the Litter. Pick of the Litter. And we had 1,000 of them made. So I have those whenever people, and they can find those at our website. And they're also on Etsy, and they're also on eBay.
Okay. Etsy and eBay. And either way, they can look you up on both of those, right? Philip Huber?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Philip Huber on Facebook. They can find me too.
Okay. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. We've had a wonderful time, gentlemen, right?
I was going to say thank you. And literally,
it's very educational.
From the bottom of my heart, sincerely, my son is obsessed with puppetry. And it's been my father. It's one of the things. My dad was always one of those loud, angry dads. But there was something about certain shows, and you mentioned Sound of Music. My father has this weird obsession with Sound of Music, and it's because of the marionette scene. I can remember literally, it was the only time you could talk through the rest of the movie. He could care less. But during the marionette scene, he literally would say, "They're getting ready to sing about the goats." Shut up. And so I just want to, again, sincerely from the bottom of my heart, thank you for taking this time. It means a lot to me. Like we've said, we've been trying to get people who did puppetry and marionettes on the show. So sincerely, thank you for this. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I'm happy to share with you my knowledge, my stories, whatever. It was a pleasure.
Right. Thanks, Philip. This has been Bonehead Weekly.